Hey, here we are again, people, to the Warhammer YouTubers den. I have surrounded myself with a different style of foliage as I'm sitting upstairs in near the kitchen area, just in case I need to make myself a sandwich throughout this lengthy episode of Chapter 4 that we're about to embark on. So with me, Keith and Vince. Any quick words of what fun you've been up to?
A lot of traveling, but glad to be back.
And Keith?
Not a lot. I still haven't finished Archaon yet, though, so not reading Warhammer.
Saving it till it's all new and fresh, right?
That's it, exactly.
Okay. Well, let's launch into things with a quick reminder. Very quickly, we left Chapter 3 with the elves fighting off a combined attack of Slaanesh demons, Be'lakor, and the rebellious Helbron. But they managed to get by, and just as they were kind of recouping their losses and counting their dead and having a council about what to do about it, an envoy came to them and expressed that there was a giant undead army marching upon the east eaves of the woods. So they all hopped onto their various phoenixes and dragons and rode on the shoulders of Treeman out to meet that, and discovered that it was Nagash who had began to make his trek all the way across after his beating at the Black Pyramid to meet up and join in with the incarnates in Athel Loren. So that is in fact the point where we open the chapter, and there's a little bit of a political intrigues, I guess, that go on here, where of course Nagash has been a long time enemy of both men and elves and dwarfs, and those are the representatives that are having the bandy about and talk about all this. So there's a lot of arguments for and against. Malekith, of course, is very against it. Gotri Hammerson, being the dwarf that he is, of course, is stalwartly against it. Whereas guys like Karl Franz and Teclis are very much for embracing Nagash. Teclis at one point, being the sort of master manipulator behind this whole business, he puts forth that, and this is the sentence itself, says that Teclis countered by saying that no being capable of containing so much death magic would be any more trustworthy than Nagash. Which I don't know if I understand the logic in that. What makes a guy who can raise dead super trustworthy? But anyway, that's Teclis's argument. Anyway, and other people there are Liliath and Duke Jared, of course, and those folks are around trying to counter and get back and forth and try to build the favor. Now, Nagash is actually sitting around nearby and overhearing all of this chatter, but he just kind of solemnly, you can imagine him just kind of sitting there, leaning back against a tree, looking down upon all these little elves, just letting them have their bandy about and make their decisions on their own, with full confidence that he still believes that ultimately they need him. So he's just going to sit around and, he's got eternal life. He can wait for them to come to the decision on his own. But still things get a little bit against him, and he finally does speak up. And this involves a guy that Vince is a big fan of, what Nagash has to say here. So I'm going to pass it to you, my friend, to let us know where it goes from there.
Absolutely. It's echoing there. So the what I particularly love is the reason Nagash doesn't say anything first is he doesn't feel the need to. He saw no reason to argue about it. As he put it, inevitability has no need for an advocate. That may be one of my most favorite lines in this entire story. To him, nobody argues that the sun should rise tomorrow. It's going to happen because it is inevitable. Well, so it is for Nagash. Like, you will accept me because you need me, so I don't see the need to say anything. Finally, though, he does get a little bored, and he's like, look, you shouldn't be afraid of me. The word of Nagash is inviolate, which I love that phrasing. And they're like, and Malekith says any betrayer would say the same, which of course Malekith may know a thing or two about betrayal. And so Nagash basically says, all right, I understand. I knew you wouldn't accept me, so I prepped up a gift for you. And at this point, Manfred, the hackles on the back of his neck goes up, and he looks over at Archaon, who is just stone-faced as always. Like, every reaction shot of Archaon in this entire series is just blank-faced because he's just got a skull. I don't know why people look at Archaon's face all the time trying to read his expression. It's just an empty, blank skull that never shows emotion. Every cutaway to him is just nothing. He's never shown anything. And so Nagash basically says, hey, I wronged you, but that initial offense wasn't at my instigation. So, let me help you out. I can't bring her back because basically Slaanesh already ate the soul of your daughter. Like, sorry that happened. Oops. So let me go ahead and do you a solid. And at that point, he makes Ashagaru, or whatever the name is, the Ashagaroth, the fell beast that is Manfred's mount, kick him off the back. And then Nagash, boop, puts Manfred into a little amethyst prison and lifts him up and is like, there you go. Do with him whatever you want. I don't care. Knock yourselves out. He's all yours. He's the one who tortured her. He kidnapped her. Basically, he's pointing way back to Sigmar's blood and saying, look, he's yours now. Go ahead. See, look, I gave up one of my Mortarks. I want to be your friend. Let's all be friends. And sure enough, it works. Even though there's still some, hemming and hawing, eventually they're all like, well, we really do want to give Manfred the what for.
I think what was a really fun moment actually is when Nagash in his exchange, he says, I am going to give you the device that trapped Eliathra. And Manfred at that point thinks, oh, goody. He's finally going to give him Archaon. Because he even at that point still thinks, oh, that's not me. That's Archaon that did that.
Yeah.
Go get that guy.
So stupid. He is so dumb. He is the dumbest character. Yes, he's going to give up the guy who has literally remained loyal to him through 4 deaths and 3,000 years. No, Archon's his homie. He's not going anywhere. So, yeah, I love it. Absolutely agreed. So, and this was a moment of great joy for me in reading the story. Watching Manfred get cocooned by Nagash and handed over to the good guys. Absolutely wonderful, victorious moment. And there's one other little thing I'll point out here. So basically, Manfred gets taken away. He's put in chains where he's deep beneath the Eternal Glade, where the glade is going to sap the life out of him, all the magic. But it's going to take a long time. By his estimation, he's going to die slowly over a couple centuries. So this is basically like a Sarlacc pit death he's staring down here, And nobody visits him. Nobody comes to gloat over him, which he finds surprising because he would have gloated. Except one person does come to visit him. There had been only 3 figures are allowed in the glade with Nagash, which is Nagash, Archaon, of course, his eternal buddy, his little buddy, and one other figure, a hooded, cloaked figure that they don't reveal. But that hooded, cloaked figure strides in over Manfred and just holds out a single hand from beneath the cloak, revealing his little ruby ring that has once again restored him back to life, as it has so many times. And Vlad just gives him the old, yeah, that's right, buddy, still kicking. And he just turns around, just shoves it in his face, and then turns around and walks out, which lets Manfred sort of call out in this bellow of rage. And much like the Man in Black and the Princess Bride, unfortunately, it alerts someone else somewhere not too far away as to Manfred's presence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that little moment as well, where Vlad just, all he does is he just comes by to gloat. That's all. Just to rub it in his face a little bit more.
Yep. It's great.
Now, the other figure that you allude to is our little friend from earlier in the past chapter. That's the other Chaos guy that's trying to muck around with Athel Loren and get a leg in. That's Be'lakor. We'll reveal to that. But at this point, then we have a little cutaway to some more Chaos action. So, Keith, do you want to get in on this with us now? Or do you want to take it over from switching theaters?
Yeah, I love that. So back in Middenheim, our big friend Kavanda, who is the kind of giant bloodthirster who's in Corrin's really good books. He's like in the third circle of armies or whatever. Um, he has approached Archaon, and he's pretty upset because he's not out in the world, in the old world, taking skulls and slaughtering things, and he's basically being relegated to a slave overseer for Archaon's big excavation that's going on in Middenheim. And Archaon just kind of very, forcefully reminds him that this is part of the Dark God's plan, and he should be happy to oversee some slaves. And if he's really all that upset about it, he can lop off a few heads, and no one's gonna care. So Kavanda rises to the challenge a little bit and says that Archaon's a failure because the Emperor is still alive, and that he should be out there doing the Dark God's work and killing the Emperor and killing the Empire of Man, and let's go kill some elves while we're at it as well. Killing is kind of this guy's MO. And so Archaon says, no, I may not have killed the Emperor, but he is broken. And that guy, Karl Franz, he's no more. And Kavanda kind of goes back and says, well, it's a mistake to let him live. And so Archaon, he kind of knew where this conversation was going, but he decided to lead Kavanda on a little bit, because he kind of likes getting a rise out of the guy. And he says, all right, okay, I'll let you take all your little corn buddies, and I'll let you go to Athel Loren, on the one condition that you kill Karl Franz and you take his skull and you bring it back to me. And so again, this is just Archaon. Remember, very early on in Archaon, in the book, Archaon was very much in league with Kairos Fateweaver, and then he betrayed that guy on, the flip of a hat, killed him, and used it to summon Kavanda, and now he's thrown his lot in with this guy. But it's not a one-to-one relationship between the two, and Archaon is in charge. So he's the one who's letting Kavanda do these things. But Kavanda, he doesn't really care. He's got the go-ahead to go slaughter some elves, so he's happy to do it. So if we jump back to Athel Loren at this point, we go back to this big council of incarnates. And as you guys mentioned, Vlad is there, and he's better than ever. So Isabella killing him has actually, and him coming back, has actually removed the Autoglock's infection that he was plagued with earlier on in the chapter. So he's better than ever. And so there are arguments going back and forth about what's going on. You have to bear in mind, the incarnates at this point, they know that Aberheim has fallen, and they know that Archaon hasn't marched on Athel Loren. They just know that the Scaramore have chased after the Emperor's hopes. They don't know about the device or anything like that that's present in Middenheim, and they don't know what Archaon's grand plan is. So they're going on back and forth about, oh, should we assault Middenheim? Should we hole up? What should we do about it? And some of them are throwing out ridiculous ideas, like Nagash wants them all to focus the powers of the incarnates to give it to him so that he can raise just legions and legions of the dead, and everyone else is kind of like, no, we're not going to let that happen. And, this is going back and forth. But as Kieran, as you alluded to earlier, our old pal Be'lakor is up to no good. So after his failed assault on the Oak of Ages, he's kind of been skulking around the shadows of Athel Loren with the laughter of the Dark Gods ringing in his ears, trying to find some way to redeem himself. Or, even better, screw over Archaon, because he does not like that guy. So he notices, he witnesses what goes down between the Incarnates and Nagash and the handing over Manfred, and he pays Manfred a little visit in his prison. And Manfred kind of implores to Be'lakor to let him out, and Be'lakor is like, well, why should I bother? What have you got for me? So Manfred drops a little tidbit that turns out there's one more elf god still alive, but she's not so godly anymore, and that Liliath is in fact, is mortal now. So Be'lakor is pretty happy with this. A chance for him to snag the soul of a elven god who's now made mortal would put him way in the good books of Slaanesh and probably be a pretty tasty delicacy as well. So he thinks this is a fair trade, and like he's no friend of the good guys, so he's like, well, why shouldn't I let Manfred go? He might wreak a bit of havoc on the guys, and everyone's a winner. So he cuts him out of his prison, and then he shadows himself away. So Manfred gets out. He kills all of his guards, but he's got one last bullet in the chamber. That little piece of information that he didn't reveal to Be'lakor. So at this point, the Council of the Incarnates, they're taking a little recess. In particular, we're confronted with Duke Jared of Bretonnia. So Manfred finds Jared, and then he reveals the biggest secret of Bretonian society of all. So he tells Jared that Lilia is in fact the Lady of the Lake, and that all of Bretonian society was made purposely as a weapon for her to wield during the Ranadandra. So all of Bretonia was just an instrument to be thrown under the bus when the end times came around. So this just shatters Jared's worldview. Like all of the ideals of chivalry and of knightly order and everything that he based his life around, his entire society is based around for centuries, is just shattered in an instant. And so this is a huge moment. You guys have anything else you want to add onto this bit?
Yeah, I think you're right. It is a pretty huge moment. I mean, we as story readers had that revealed to us back in Cain, right? That Ladriel is Liliath, is Lady of the Lake, and all those things in together. She is in fact an elf god that has now sunken back into a mortal form, but of course still maintains her some godly powers as she does, of foresight, etc. But yeah, this is Manfred's little machination, and I guess the first thing I want to say is I'm kind of sad that he was not imprisoned longer. Like it was a pretty short imprisonment for him to come and go for such a jerk. But anyway, alas, he is, and so he is. He's mucking about again and trying to be spiteful and ruin other people's days because his day has been so ruined, and that's where he gets Jared involved. So where it goes from here is Jared sets upon himself to confront Liliath about this, and so they kind of effectively it's almost like a dude at a party that just kind of pulls the girl he likes aside and says, "We got to have a talk," and they wander off into the woods together, and she's like, "Yeah." She kind of senses what he wants to talk about, and she knows it's coming. But he lays it on her and lays on his disappointment, and that it's been a lie, and he's been misled for his entire life, and his ancestors have been less misled, etc., etc. And really the crux of it comes down to the fact that she's just not who they believed she was in the first place, right? Anyway, Liliath here does something that I think is bizarrely odd, like just freaking nuts. And that is that it's not so much that she doesn't deny anything or tries to weave any other truth around that. She just says, "Yeah, Jared, that's right. That's what I did. I'm that person. Sorry, I guess, that I'm not who you thought I was. Sorry I'm not your best girlfriend. I'm just a girl." And but then she says something that I think is just not so strange. So we go back to Cain again for a second. When she revealed to Araloth, "Here's this pocket realm that I've made so that you can be safe, and so that after the Ranadandra happens here on the Warhammer world, there's going to be some small pocket that's unknown to Chaos that you can play a part in and regrow society." She's never told anybody this. She's never even told Teclis this, who is her closest confidant in all these things that are going on. But yet, she tells this to Jared, just in a way that, like, "Oh, I'm going to make you feel better about my grand plan by telling you, even though you and your Bretonian society might feel bad about maybe playing a role of a bit of a tool, a means to an end in that, I'm going to tell you this." Well, guess what? The sneaky Be'lakor is hanging out in the shadows because he was told by Malekith, or sorry, not Malekith, but Manfred, to what Liliath was all about, and he's currently stalking her. So he hears this, right? And this is the big reveal that ruins everything for her, because he then shares that through the warp and whatever crazy Farsqueaker communications chaos demons have, shares that with everybody else. So the big reveal of this pocket realm, it's out there. It's out there now, and is now vulnerable. So that, I thought, was just like that's why I kind of framed it as a little bit of a high school girl at a party kind of thing, because it sounds like that's the kind of behavior that comes out of that. Vince, what's your take on all that big action?
Sure. So I have a lot of thoughts on this. I think this is underwritten, right? Like the reality is, and I don't mean to impugn the writer of this. Like they've done a good job. There's a lot. But the reality is the writer is not given enough time to work through what needs to be worked through here. On one side of this equation, you have a religious zealot. Like imagine the Pope. Okay, like somebody who's dedicated their entire life to a belief, who believes it to the very core of their soul. There is no shadow, no shred of doubt. Okay, suddenly meets a person who says, not only am I your God, and you know it to be true, but also everything that you've been told, I basically kind of made up just because I needed you to go fight barbarian hordes. Or whatever, right? I needed you to be a weapon, and so I used your people I gave them these virtues, these values, and they've served you well. You were a tool to me, and that's what I did. And it's almost impossible for us in this short little span of text to imagine what that would be like. I mean, that is somebody, like, literally your entire worldview, your entire life, to the core of your being, every shred of value, everything you hold dear and have built your society on for 1,000 years, crumbles to dust in an instant. Right? Now, it doesn't really. Your values still might be as good, but and can still have value despite the fact that they were built on a lie. But that's something later you come upon, you know, after months of reflection, right? That's not something you have immediately. All you have immediately is the loss. On the other side of the equation, you have this former god who's now forced to see the disaster that she has wrought, and is also now mortal, and I'm guessing probably racked with lots of unfortunate human emotions. They show that a couple times, that like when she was a god, she could afford to be aloof and didn't care, but now she's mortal and has to care, and she has all these weird emotions banging around in her head that she hasn't had to deal with ever. And so what we have here is two people in the clutch of making some really bad decisions, right? And the reality is, for you to really buy it, this needed to be like 4 pages long, right? This, honestly, like if this was a novel, this would be a significant section in a book, right? As this conversation slowly unfolds and you get internal monologues and all this stuff to really sell you on the depth of emotion being felt by both parties. As it is now, we have like half a page, so we got to construct it in our own minds. So I think that's why she told him. I think that's why he's where he is, literally about to kill her. For all intent, like you hadn't quite said that, but he gets out a sword and has it to her throat, right? Like that's the end result of this, and like. And this noble knight who knows nothing but chivalry and honor is about to ram a greatsword through the throat of a defenseless woman on her knees. Like, that is as far from honorable behavior as you can get. It's literally the opposite end of the spectrum. And yet he's driven to this because both are in the throes of just, you know, completely being out of their gourds by this confrontation.
Yeah, so, I agree with Vince. I think it's a good it's a very condensed reflection of, you know, Liliath is feeling guilty. But not only does it give it insight into Liliath's character, it also provides us with a kind of a literary device. So back in Kane, we knew as readers about the existence of Haven. So whatever else went on in Thankful and whatever's been going on in Archaon, we always had it in the back of our minds that, like, oh, it's okay, we have a safety net. Liliath has set up Haven, and you know, no matter what happens to this world, everything will be okay. But, you know, if I jump ahead really quickly, the Dark Gods find out about Haven and they crush it. So we're you know, at the beginning of Chapter 4 of Archaon, and our get out of jail free card has just been snatched away. So as a reader, I was kind of left thinking, well, Jesus, what's going to happen now? What happens if they do destroy the world and the Ranadandra happens? Because our safety net has been taken away. And I thought that was, maybe it wasn't, like you said, written the best because of page constraints or whatever, but I thought it was a really neat trick as a reader that I felt a kind of like a confusion and I don't know moment. I don't know what's going to happen,
Yeah, that going forward, you're absolutely right, Keith. I think that's a really big theme because that was Liliath's play all along, and that's why I think it's such a big deal that she just blabs it to try to make one single mortal guy feel better about it when his society has already been nearly wiped from the earth. Like, what good's it going to do at that point to make him feel a little bit better about it when his Bretonnian society is already obliterated?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the cold, logical interpretation.
And I kind of want to move on from Bretonnia after this thought, and that is, what she doesn't really drive home is that she made Bretonnia what it was. And what I mean by that is, it was, just like the Empire in its infancy, was a whole bunch of tribes of barbarians marauding around, getting beat up by orcs, and the unification of that society was based upon the reveal of the Lady of the Lake and her teachings of virtues. That's what unified them together to actually create Bretonnia in the first place. Which I'm surprised she doesn't counter with to Jared, to buy her some favor, saying, you know what, you're just a barbarian tribe, if not for me.
Well, try and look at it from the peasant's point of view. Those guys did not have a good time in Bretonnia. Like, Jared's upset, and he was a frickin' duke. Imagine what the peasants would have to feel about it if they realized who Liliath was.
Yeah, their life is still shit.
I have one more. I have one more thought on this. So we're all familiar with the concept of the unreliable narrator, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this whole series uses unreliable narrators left and right. Okay, like throws you misdirects and where like a character will outright tell you, the reader, something, but they're wrong. I do not think Haven is destroyed. We haven't come to Bellacor's ultimate fate, and we're about to. But looking ahead like a page, I do not think anybody found out about Haven. I don't think so at all. I think Be'lakor, being who he is, this little master of secrets, he absolutely sat on that, and his fate that's about to happen to him prevented him from ever telling anyone. I think she lost communication with Haven for other reasons, and she is assuming the Dark Gods found it and destroyed it. But I don't think this is. I don't think you crush a thing like that off screen. And here's what further lends credence to this in my mind. She says she felt it slipping away, like even at the start of the conversation. So like before Be'lakor knew anything, really, and could have effectively communicated it. My thought is that something else happened in Haven that this is my call to the future, that we will go and learn about at a future time, where we're going to learn what Ariloth is doing. Like, we're not going to lose Ariloth and all those very relevant characters without like something being explained what happened. I think they closed off their realm purposely. Like, either her power drained out enough that she couldn't sense it anymore, or they themselves bulwarked it out. That's just my feeling, based on a couple little sentences that she tosses out there. So.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. Okay, well, why don't you take it from there and let us know about the fate of Be'lakor then. Pick it up from
Absolutely. So, Be'lakor basically overhears this, and Jared's got his sword to Liliath's throat, and he doesn't. It says like he isn't sure. You know, all of his wild emotions are driving him to kill this lady. Yet he's still got a lifetime of training saying, "Don't do that." But he never figures out whether or not he would actually have the chance to. As Be'lakor thinks, "Wow, he might actually do this. I better intervene, because if he kills her, I'm not going to be able to steal all her mojo." So he runs out there. And Jared immediately goes back, and boom, it's instinct mode time. You're getting charged by a demon prince. And he spins on his heels and intervenes, puts himself between Be'lakor and Lily, right? And he actually manages to block, sort of the initial strike of Be'lakor. and actually drive Be'lakor back. But in kind of short order, Be'lakor overwhelms him. I mean, he is a demon prince, and not just any demon prince. He's the first damned, right? He is sort of the demon princiest of demon princes. And Duke Jared is, in the end, just a mortal Bretonnian lord. Although clearly, as I've said, these Bretonnian lords need to invest in whatever training gives them heroic killing blow a little more. I would have like just bam, just knock that guy back down to size. But sadly, I don't think he invested in that particular virtue.
Only one per army, I'm afraid.
Right, yeah, somebody else took that and they died a long number of fights ago, like back at Le Maison Tal. And technically you can have two. But anyway, so Be'lakor very quickly overwhelms him, and in a pretty brutal fashion. Slashes him across the face, rips one of his eyes out of his head, and when Jared's down on the ground in the mud, Be'lakor walks up and steps on the back of his leg, crushes the plate mail, and shatters his femur bone in half. Like, basically, and then turns to leave him to just kind of bleed out. And spins on Lilith, who is not able to fight a creature like this at such close proximity and in hand-to-hand. And she's about to get sort of skewered when suddenly a very bright and shining blessed sword comes striking up right through Be'lakor's back and out hit the front of his gut. As Duke Jared, fighting to the end, man. Those Bretonnian lords, you can't stop them. He gets back and swings up and puts his sword right through Be'lakor's center. Not enough to bring Be'lakor down, but enough to certainly throw him off his game and allow Lilith to recover. Jared then collapses into unconsciousness from his wounds. Lilith starts conjuring a little magic to buy her some time, and she buys just the few necessary seconds that allow the rest of the mod squad to ride in. And in arrive all the rest of well, not all the rest, but the incarnates start arriving in short order. And, you know, sort of the first among them is, I'm trying to remember who was the actual first among them. Oh, the Everqueen, right?
Tyrion and Malekith that came rolling in.
That's right, yes. Yeah, you're right. Alariel told Malekith and Tyrion, and they both shot out. So Seraphon and Malekith come in, and then Tyrion, of course, on the fastest horse in the universe, is just like there in a heartbeat, because that is a fast horse, as this story has told us again and again. And they're both there, and basically in short order, you know, Be'lakor tries to escape, but he's going to use the shadows to escape. He's going to use shadow magic. But bad choice there, Be'lakor, because the incarnate of shadows, the guy who literally owns the lore you're trying to use, is right there looking over you. And Malekith just very quickly is like, nope, 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 sucks all the shadow magic right out of him, and he's stuck out the open. And there's a funny moment where he's like all cloaked in shadows stealthing, and he like pulls all the shadows off him, and I can just see Be'lakor in like this little like mid, you know, like one of these things, like an old cartoon, where he's just kind of doop, 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 and you know, he's exposed. And then
he's got his hands in front of his eyes like this.
Right, exactly.
Okay. You can't see me.
Yeah, I'm invisible. I'm shadowy. No, you're not. We can all see you. And in very short order, the incarnates overwhelm him and capture him. And after, like, Jared is basically picked up and treated by the healers, and that's the only reason he lives. He's in, you know, with some of the best healers in the world. Not to mention, I don't know, Alariel, incarnate of life, seems like a pretty. If you're going to get injured anywhere in her proximity, seems a pretty good place to do it. And Be'lakor is taken down, and I particularly love this next little exchange. Oh man, this is great. So like, I'm just going to keep going because this is one of my favorite little moments.
Yeah, go man. Roll
okay, because this is so good. So Be'lakor gets captured and he's drugged down in the dungeons, and there's some kind of like discussion of what do we do with him. Some of the incarnates want to kill him outright, some want to torture him for information. Lilith doesn't want him dead because if he dies he goes back to the warp, and then he can tell all the chaos gods like, hey, guess what, there's this place called Haven. And see, she's still thinking this at that point, even though she doesn't have like true touch with it. So, anyway, that leads back to my other thing. Anyway, they all come to the concept of like, yeah, let's let's get some info out of this guy. So like kind of the Emperor says that, and Tyrion tends to agree with the Emperor. The two of them have a very close relationship for reasons we're going to find out here in a little while. And so they drag him forward, and when they drag Be'lakor into the court, like you can see all the incarnates sitting in like this half circle around him, just judging him. It's like the Order of Wizards judging Harry Potter in the 5th movie or whatever. And he gets drug in, and he is just beaten to a pulp. Like his horn is sheared off. He has just been tortured by the master executioners of Harganeth or whatever. Just really given the deal. And a couple of them are like, oh, and a couple of them look at Malekith and give him like the tut tut tut. But he's kind of like, he doesn't react, but what he's thinking in his head is, I didn't tell him to do it. And of course you learn that the person who did tell them to just torture the living bejeezers out of this guy is Alariel. Because she's like, no, I want every drop of information out of this guy we can. Like, she's not putting up with it. She has no compassion for a creature like this. Like, she is all about life and all this stuff, but this guy, he is pure chaos. He is anathema to life, and he deserves nothing less than the worst at all turns. And of all the incarnates, the only one who actually reads the situation correctly and figures it out is Nagash, who then turns to look at Alariel and gains a newfound respect for the darkness that she's sort of harboring in her soul, and he's like, all right, I like this girl a little more. And you can actually, like, I can just see Nagash cracking like this slight grin under his big helm of like, I like the elf chick. She's good. Just actually this slight moment of acceptance from Nagash. So I thought that was rather fun that Alariel, and I think probably that's partially because, of course, Alariel contains Ariel, right? Like, she absorbed the goddess of the Wood Elves, and of course Ariel had all of the seasons within her, which means that she had just as much winter and cold as she did sort of, spring and life or whatever. And so basically they drag Be'lakor forward and say, tell us everything you know. And Be'lakor says, yes, sir, and tells them everything. Like, everything. He just spills the beans, because at this point, he doesn't think there's anything left to be gained by keeping silent. Also, he's kind of afraid of what Malekith and Nagash can come up with. He's been tortured enough, and he figures he's beyond physical pain. But Nagash and Malekith are very creative individuals in control of very powerful magics, and he's not super inclined to find out exactly just how in control they are. So, and plus, it'll be a thorn in Archaon's side for them to all know his plans, which is another great win. So he spills the beans and basically says, "Hey, Archaon's digging under Middenheim. That's been the prize all along. There's a thing there that they can use to open a third portal to the Chaos Realm. So just as the poles are currently these big, giant, undulating portals of the warp, they sort of balance each other and prevent the world from actually sliding into chaos. There are actually two in balance. But if a third one opens up, it tips the balance and the world blows up. Gets sucked into the warp. And that's the story he relates.
And then Be'lakor gets into
that implication home. That's Alariel is concerned, obviously, about the weave and the balance, and that's what Athel Loren is all about. So the two portals at the poles, sort of diametrically opposite in the distance apart, is what keeps them manageable. So if there's a third one that opens that up, then it, supposedly in the way that they write it here, not only gives another realm channel into chaos, but it would increase the power of the others by shifting the stability of the balance and the weave more towards chaos. So that gives it a little bit of trouble. But this is also a set of political intrigues and realizations for Teclis too. Keith, do you want to get in on this part of the action?
Yeah. So with this revelation from Be'lakor, Lilius kind of proposes that he use magic to get to Middenheim, and I think Geld points out that no, the magic that would be required to teleport all the incarnates in the armies is great enough to cause a rift by itself, so that's not going to happen. So all the incarnates kind of they take a break to kind of digest all of this, apocalyptic information, and we've got a cutaway scene between Teclis and Lilith. And it's at this point that Lilith reveals to Teclis about Haven and how she no longer can sense Haven, and that there is essentially no hope, right? And that there's even because remember, her original goal was not to stop the end times, but to make it better for the next go-around, because this happens in cycles. And now she's just lost all hope. And Teclis has done some pretty atrocious things, even by his standard. Like he gave up his niece, he killed his brother and then brought him back to life, essentially. And the only reason why he was able to do all of these things because he put his complete faith and trust in Lilith, who is his patron and his goddess. And then he realizes that she's been keeping secrets from him, and he can't handle it. And so she asks him for forgiveness, and he just says, "Not today. Maybe I could forgive you eventually for all the lies and all the horrible, horrible things that you've made me done, but not today." And he just walks off at that point. And it's around this time as well that Jared has recovered, and he has kind of revealed Lilith, who she was, and has just led the Bretonnians out of Athel Loren. But he built up quite a rapport with the Emperor through their siege, and he's kind of willing to come back to fight on the side of the good guys, but he does not abhor being even in the same forest, if you like, as Lilith. And he will not battle alongside the elves. So if the Emperor came calling, he might be there, but not for Lilith.
So this was a couple of emotional moments, really, I think.
Yeah.
It's Teclis who has been the main machine behind everything, but all of that was under the premise that he could stop the Ranadandra. Like, he could stop that cycle from happening and preserve the world and save the world. So now what Lilith is telling him is, yeah, you know what? All along, I didn't tell you this, but that wasn't the plan. The plan wasn't to stop it. The plan was just to have that pocket dimension, that little safe haven. So yeah, as you said, Keith, he reflects on all of the things that he did, good and bad, to get to that goal, and now he's just completely despondent about it.
Yeah.
So it's an emotional thing for a good old Teclis, who you love and hate him at times along this story.
Well, and I think throughout the entire series, the writers have done a really good job of showing how regretful Teclis has been in doing the things that he's been doing, but he's been doing it all along, and that all kind of comes to a head in that little passage between the two.
Mm-hmm.
So that was good. Then we also have another heart-to-heart here, where Tyrion and the Emperor are kind of sitting on a log, and they're gazing up at the stars, and they're chatting away, and the Emperor kind of makes a flippant remark that, the elves are such a manipulative race, as they're, referring to Lilith, and it's like, oh, it's no wonder. I mean, she's your god, and no wonder you guys turned out the way that you did with all your machinations and your politicking. And so Tyrion, replies, well, that's a bit rich coming from a man wearing a skin not his own. And so the Emperor, so we're kind of, this is the first kind of time where it's kind of brought up, like, oh, what? What do you mean? And it goes on to say that the Emperor doesn't mind being secretive because it gives him an advantage. And then, of course, we still know that the Emperor is a good guy because Tyrion knows his secret, and why else would Tyrion keep it secret if, they didn't think the Emperor was on the level? And then he goes on to reveal that the Emperor has spent many lifetimes in the vortex, and he would hate to think it was for nothing. And then they must convince the others that they've got to go to Middenheim, they've got to stop Archaon. So one thing that's very interesting to note about this kind of interjection is that I went back and I checked a couple of chapters previously in the book, and not once has the Emperor been referred to anything other than the Emperor. So the authors don't use the name Karl Franz, at least since chapter 1, maybe not even in the entire book. So we won't give it away quite yet who this man is in the Emperor's skin, but I don't think it's Karl Franz.
I hadn't recognized that. That's a good catch. Going back on it. Cool. Right. So I guess from here then, as the ever around the clock meetings of incarnates and the whole circle chatter continues, but with these three key happenings that are going on, and Teclis revealing effectively that after all it can't be stopped. The Round of Dandre is going to happen. There is only one last hope, and that is they all finally come to the conclusion that they got to get to Middenheim and they got to wreck whatever artifact that is in the Fauschlag. And our little dwarf friend, who's been hanging around a little bit, gives out a big gigantic cheer and probably downs a few flagons of ale in that instant because he's finally ready for some action. So he's happy about that. And then they effectively decide they're going to march on it, but it's not quite ready to go for that yet, because at the same time we see that Athel Loren is still under attack. Like, while all these incarnates have been hanging around and having meetings, some of the, I guess, second level heroes like Imric and Durthru and Naestra and Archaon have been out on the eaves of the forest, beating down the seemingly endless multitude of demons, or sorry, not of demons, but of beastmen. So all of that kind of action is going on, and beastmen just keep coming. But what I'm trying to find in here is there was one other thing that I might be getting out of sequence that I should see if I missed. But there's a little bit of a dream sequence, isn't there, where Nath, the prophetess, goes into her little dream world and soaking around?
No, she's already dead. That's how they summoned
that was the...
yeah.
Pardon me, I'm way out of sequence. That was what got Bellicor and his demons there in the first place, wasn't it?
That's right. So what's happening here is essentially the beastmen are assaulting Athel Loren over and over and over again, and the second-tier fighters are just slaughtering them until one of the glade is just so covered in blood that a giant rift opens up, and a bunch of the corn demons can get in. So it's that blood and it's all the slaughter that is able to summon them.
All right, so that's what triggers it. It's just the frenzy of slaughter that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so this is where it switches back to, right at the beginning of the chapter, we had that little exchange between Archaon and Kabanda, and Archaon granted Kabanda the rights to lead a blood hunt into Athel Loren. And so this is him and his old demon host just ripping out and laying the assault. So it comes off with such a sudden fury that the sentinels who are guarding around the King's Glade are overrun in seconds, right? And Imric is one of the first ones to be there to oppose it and tries to rally the line to hold them off. But again, this is one of those big battle scenes that I'll admit to you guys just kind of goes into smash, bite, crash, and there's rarely super exciting, intriguing things that happen here, except for maybe the ways that things die. So if you guys want to highlight any kind of key points of the battle or moments that stuck out to you, please do.
Yeah, I'll point out a few. So when this happens, Alariel gets totally overwhelmed and kind of faints because she's so intertwined with Athel Loren and the forest, and so this massive demon incursion just kind of knocks her out. And so Tyrion and Teclis, the brothers, are kind of standing over her, defending her, while the other incarnates run off into the fight. And Nagash and Archaon are kind of hanging back. Nagash is just standing there all stoic with a big swirling purple vortex around him that's just destroying any demon that comes near. But he's not really kind of aiding the fight. So even though he's been accepted by the incarnates, he's still content to let them do most of the... Like, he doesn't care if Athel Loren gets destroyed. He knows the incarnates can look after themselves. And Archaon he's on his abyssal terror, who's just kind of floating up, and he's, again, if something comes his way, he'll blast it, but otherwise he's not doing anything. One interesting really bit that I thought was so Liliath and Gelt are fighting together, and there's at one point where Gelt is kind of big blizzard of metal just shearing fleshhounds apart. But he becomes distracted, and so Lilith becomes set upon by a bunch of demons. And who was to come to her rescue but Vlad? And do you want to take this, Vince? To see you nodding away there. I know you like Vlad.
Sure, absolutely. No, I'm happy to take it. Yeah, he shows up and he just starts cleaving his way through fleshhounds. You can just see him just dancing around. He puts like 6 of them in the dirt, doesn't get a scratch on him. And Blood Drinker is just doing the dirty business here. And Lilith kind of looks at him for a moment, like she shoots this questioning look at him, like, "Why are you helping me?" And he just looks back like, "Well, I don't know. It just seems like a thing to do." Like, I love this guy in this whole story.
He's such a gentleman.
He is, yes. He's not going to let a lady get killed by dogs. That would be rude. There was a little brief passage we kind of skimmed, but when all the incarnates are there talking, there's a nice part where, like, Vlad is the only one of the outsiders that's actually at home here, because he's of such noble bearing and conducts himself with such perfect court etiquette that all the elves are like, "Oh, this Vlad guy's really nice." And they just, wait a minute, no, he's a terrible vampire. But they just keep getting taken in by him because he's so polite and so courteous and has exactly the right movements and manners. And such he does in fighting, too. And he just, like, absolutely protects the two of them until Gelt can recover, which is a nice little moment. The only other moment I liked is that happened right before this was Gotri Hammerson, the dwarf, and I'm trying to remember who he's fighting with. But he and his fighting partner, I don't remember who it was, are basically getting overwhelmed by, might have been the Emperor, actually. Like, the Emperor gets kind of driven off and is up in the air, and Gotri's going to get, just this little rune lord on the ground, just getting overwhelmed by bloodletters who are now, like, on him, and he's trying to crush him and punch him and do what he can, but he's just going to get murdered. Like, one of them's ringing up for the strike, and Archaon is just, like, lazily floating above them, and he's actually yelling out, like, "Hey, you want to lend a hand?" And then they tackle him, and they're about to kill him, and Archaon just like, and zaps them all into ash. And the dwarf looks up, and I can just see him like, "A little sooner next time, maybe? Like, did you have to wait till the last minute? I get it." And, like, again, by the way, they make reference if he looks up at Archon's face, and Archon's face is just blank. Like, yes, it's still blank. Still a skull. So that's just, like, nice little moments like that. So I particularly like that. And then, yes, Vlad ends up joining the fight for a while and actually fighting with those two. So I like that very much.
Caradrian has a bit of action here early, too, where he gets into it with... I should say that there's multiple bloodthirsters here, Kabanda being the sort of the top-notch one, but there's a couple other ones there as well. And Caradrian gets into it with one of those, so he swoops down on him, his new freshly fiery Ashtari, and kind of wreathes this bloodthirster in fire so that he's actually lit up and burning on the outside. But the bloodthirster himself does enough damage to Ashtari to shear off a wing and send him tumbling. This is apparently Caradrian's new role to play as he goes tumbling off of phoenixes that are felled from the sky. But it creates a nice cinematic image of this kind of fight. These two flyers bashing each other through the air, one full of fire, one full of rage, and a lot of chopping back and forth. So that, again, comes to some kind of close where for the moment anyway, he gets the best of it, and Caradrian is sort of put down for a moment, not dead, but poor little Phoenix is, before it shifts away to other parts of the battlefield. And Kabanda kind of goes on a little bit of a rage. All right. Any key moments about Kabanda's rage that you remember, Keith?
Well, first of all, I would like to officially nominate Ashtari for character that gets killed and brought back to life as many times. Now, I don't think he's going to beat Krell or Archaon, but the book's not over yet, and he could definitely die a couple more times and get brought back to life. Because this is twice.
I know that we joked about that when we were playing our Warhammer game last week.
That's right.
I played Caradrian on Ashtari, on the new fresh incarnate one.
Yeah.
And we discovered halfway through the game that in the rules that Ashtari doesn't actually have the Fire Reborn rule that like regular Phoenix do, like so he can't come back to life in the Warhammer game. And we thought that was really odd because he dies so many times.
That's his thing apparently, is that he dies and comes back to life.
Yeah.
So that's how they get rid of one of the minor bloodthirsters. There's another minor bloodthirster, some just nameless face, and he goes after Alariel, who's being protected by Tyrion and Teclis. And Teclis kind of starts showing off for his brother and just goes crazy with the magic. So he uses fire and lightning and rocks and thorns and starlight and amber spears and shadows and ghosts and like everything from all of the 8 lores of magic, and he just wrecks a bloodthirster. And then Tyrion just kind of looks over and just gives him the slight nod of going, well, I'm an incarnate, but that was pretty good for a non-incarnate, so good job. So he's getting that respect from his brother again. I always like to think, I don't know if it's in the lore, but I like to think that Tyrion is the slightly older twin by like 2 minutes, and Teclis is always just trying to catch up to his big brother. In my head, I don't know if it's a thing.
Yeah, no, I hear you. It's a very like Caramon and Raistlin moment, the two of them back to back. If that resonates with anybody, if you happen to know that series, like it strikes of that same thing. The sorcerer and the warrior back to back fighting against all odds. It's just a great moment, and it's good to see. Like battle cleanses away all of their doubts and things, and they are one again, right?
Yeah.
I'm glad you said that, Vince, and I'm going to derail this conversation here just for a second for that one point. Because I've often wondered that the Tyrion-Teclis parallel is, to me, exactly like that. So you got the super-powered, brawny warrior with his twin brother who is the frail, waify, brilliant wizard. And that's Tyrion and Teclis. But for those of you that haven't read any Dragon's Lance novels, that is exactly Caramon and Raistlin. And I've often wondered back in Warhammer lore if Tyrion and Teclis are old enough to preclude that, or if they are, in fact, just designed after Weiss and Hickman's creations of those two guys. What do you know about the timing of that, Vince?
Historically, they come afterward. So Weiss and Hickman, absolutely historically after for actual creation. That is to say, Caramon and Raistlin were 2 characters in Jeff Grubb's game, which was actually being played in 1981, 82. The full story was published the first book was published in late 83, 84. That's when the first Dragonlance books came out, was 84. Warhammer itself existed, and it wasn't published until 1983. And my memory of it is that Tyrion didn't exist, and he didn't come into existence until sometime later. And only the Tyrion Teclis thing was 2nd or 3rd edition. So he has to. So as far as I know, Caramon and Raistlin precede Tyrion and Teclis by probably 4 to 5 years, and certainly those novels were game changers, right? I mean, everybody read those.
All right, good. Okay, that settles that. And
well,
many years of
just to add one more level onto that, have you ever kind of thought about how Village the Curseling is essentially a chaotic mirror image of Tyrion and Teclis? That you've got the brawny soldier warrior brother and then the decrepit sorcerer brother, but instead of working together, one melds and takes over the other.
Well, see, I actually thought of those guys, the Village character, as the Mad Max Master Blaster character.
Sure. They are very Master Blaster.
That's what I thought.
That's fair.
Okay, anyway, now that we've derailed that,
going on.
Let's get back on track.
Okay, well, no sooner has Teclis dispatched that bloodthirster than another bloodthirster shows up. And Teclis is pretty pooped at this point, so he fires off a few bolts of lightning, but this bloodthirster's not really bothered, and he kind of batters Teclis to the ground, but it's at this very, very fortunate moment that Alariel decides to wake up, and she just starts shooting roots through this bloodthirster to stop him, and he kind of hacks him away a little bit, but she's, we've already seen that she's got a bit of a wild side, a bit of a dark side. So she just shoots him full of roots, and then they burrow into him, and then she just kind of does this, and then the bloodthirster explodes outwards, filled with tree roots and stuff, which was very visceral and graphic. So that was fantastic.
Can I say one thing here real quick, Keith?
We do.
We mentioned and another bloodthirster shows up. The question might be asked by our viewers, dear philosophers, how many bloodthirsters are participating in this fight? That's like a crazy Lord level character that you generally see one of on the table. The answer, dear listeners, is 16 bloodthirsters are participating in this fight. That is including Kabanda and Korax, who are both like special upper-level bloodthirsters. But there are 14 quote-unquote regular bloodthirsters participating in this fight. I had to go back and double-check that just because I was like, that's a lot. Yeah, that's a lot of bloodthirsters.
Yeah, but if you're worried about that, and like the good guys are just be like, oh no, they're gonna get swamped with like plebeian bloodthirsters, don't worry, because now Alariel, she like sends out a call. I kind of like to think of her of like doing this and then making a big kind of like woody trumpeting noise, like the Ents from Lord of the Rings, because she summons a bunch of Treeman guardians who have been asleep for centuries, just hanging out in the glade.
Yeah, I think of it as the low rumble of the Treebeard call, where he gets all the Ents and Hjorns of Fangorn Forest to come together.
Yes, exactly. So those guys wake up and they just start wrecking face. Like they just wade into the bloodletters and just start swinging their big branches and wrecking stuff. And it's about this time that Kabanda joins the battle. So he said he heads straight towards Teclis and Alariel. At this point, Tyrion has rode off somewhere. And one Treeman gets in his way, and he just smacks that guy around like not even a problem. And Teclis is trying out his magics again. That's no good. Two more Treemen show up, and then a kind of a brawl ensues. And then they're wrestling a little bit. Teclis summons the Lord of Beasts and starts empowering the Treemen, and it's looking bad for Kabanda. Except then he breathes fire all over them, and everyone knows that Treemen are flammable and they don't like fire. So they go down pretty quickly. And at this point, Teclis, to bear in mind, like Teclis, he's a pretty powerful dude, but like dealing with 16 bloodthirsters and he's surrounded by incarnates, like you could understand why he's feeling like he might feel a little bit inferior at this point. And he just kind of freezes up. And so it's kind of up to Alariel to save the day. So she shoots Kabanda full of root spears again, and he doesn't really care. And it's at this point that the Emperor on Deathclaw just slams into Kabanda. Remember, the Emperor has lost the Wind of Heavens. So he's kind of like this pseudo-incarnate. Like, he's treated with all the respect of an incarnate because he still has the traces of the wind, but he's not nearly as powerful as the others. So everyone kind of recognizes that he's, it's great he saved the lives of Teclis and Alariel, but he's in a bad spot, and Kabanda is going to overwhelm him pretty quickly. So Alariel gets this idea, and she summons the remaining ancient treemen to kind of come to the center of the glade, and then start like locking arms and roots and legs and stuff, and form this like giant wall of living treemen to try and create a bastion of defense. And they want to hold out until all of the other armies of the elves and the men and the dwarves can get there to try and help them out. So you get this really cool image of like treemen picking up. One of them picks up Hammerson, and again you get this great image of Hammerson shouting, "Nobody tosses a dwarf," as the treeman is trying to run back to the bastion, and the same thing happens to Vlad, and Malekith and all the other incarnates are just flying back towards this. But of course, it's this point where the Blood Hunt bring out the Skull Cannon, which is just the anti-treeman weapon because it's shooting flaming cannonballs at them, and they just start wrecking that kind of stuff. And then I don't know, without getting into specifics, some treemen who are carrying dwarves and Vlad, they die, and Gelt's Quicksilver, he gets shot out of the air, and his Pegasus is a broken leg, and again the gash is just not helping anybody. But eventually they pretty much all make it back to the fortress. The Emperor disengages from Kabanda and he flies away, and he grabs Teclis by the claw and drops him off behind the bastion. And it's at this point that Lilith has an idea. So one of you guys want to explain what Lilith's grand plan is?
Yeah, certainly. So, as you say, they're all kind of gathered together, and in desperation, the waves and waves of chaos are still coming, and there's no end of flesh hounds, there's no end of bloodletters, there is systematically blasts of corn cannons that are wrecking their little tree man bastion. but they're buying themselves really just a few minutes. So Lilith has this reveal. So she, with her mortal self, and again becomes a little bit emotional about things, and she turns to Teclis and she says, "This is our last chance. You got to get to Middenheim. You have to leave this place. This is your only chance at all is to get to Middenheim." And Gelt is there, and he says effectively, "Look, lady, I already told you I can't do that crucible spell again because it's not within the power. It would rip a hole and create another chaos warp here." And she's like, yeah, I get that. Here's the idea, though. I still have godly power within my blood. Teclis, you as the master sorcerer here, and I'm going to use it again, the most powerful sorcerer in the world.
One of the 6 of them, yeah.
7 people have had that title already. But she turns to Teclis and she says, "Take my power. Use it to transport everybody here, all the incarnates, all the power, and go and oppose Archaon in Middenheim." And even though the last time that we saw these two together, Teclis and Liliath, he wasn't feeling so good about her, right? He was like, "I might forgive you one day," but then he walked away. But yet, with a lot of remorse, he finally does agree, and she hands him a dagger and puts it at her breast and says, "Spear this into my heart. Your time is going to be limited because as the blood ebbs from me and the life flows from me, as it releases, you have to harness it, and you have to pull it all together and use that power to transport yourselves away." So, without it becoming too much of a teary moment for him, she essentially just puts the dagger in Teclis' hand, puts it to her breast, and Teclis doesn't thrust the dagger, but she throws herself against the dagger, so that the lifeblood ebbs and flows from her. Now, Teclis goes into this transic spell casting while the battle is still raging around him, and he struggles to contain it. He's working hard to make it happen. He's desperately reaching and clinging for all these things, and but at last, as he goes unconscious, he's in a realm, an otherworldly dimension, and that's all you see of that until Teclis awakes. And Teclis awakes on a cold stone floor, and he's shackled. He's shackled with manacles to prevent him from doing any kind of magic. You can sense that right away, that his magic is quelled. And as he sort of regains his consciousness, his gaze comes up, and he hears a low, grating voice that kind of sounds like it's coming from behind a veil. And it says to him, "You have journeyed a long way to die, elf," intoned Archaon, "but do not despair. The world shall not long outlast you." So, what's this mean? It's just Teclis.
Bum, bum, bum.
Bum.
This would be way more exciting if that was the end of the chapter, as opposed to just, it goes on.
Yeah, but I think for us, though, because this has been a good, lengthy session, that will be the end of our session here. But do you fellas want to pipe up with any other quick tidbits before we leave that one that we might have glossed over too quickly for you?
No, I thought it was a lot of fun. It was cool to see the Incarnates fight. I find it hilarious that one of them does make reference that the only one of them who doesn't need any help from anyone else is Nagash. Like, one of them looks at Nagash and is like, he's the only one among us who doesn't need the rest of us, and is kind of like scared and taken aback by that thought of like, yeah, he's fine. He's going to be good. Also, if they had let his entire army of undead camp in the woods with them, they probably wouldn't have had this problem, right? Like, they would have had a whole army of the undead to fight all these dumb bloodletters, but no. So they got no one to blame but themselves for this.
All right.
Fair point.
Okay, gents.
I have a slight balderdash moment, if I may.
Oh, sure. We always like those.
Well, just a little bit. Why has no one mentioned the moon? Why has no one kind of said, hey, Someone tried to blow up the Chaos Moon. There's a big chunk missing out of that. Why are we not all dead?
Well, because the lizardmen are dead instead. They took it in the chin instead.
Well, yeah, but no one knows that. That's my point, right? Like, no one realizes that the lizardmen saved the world from giant cataclysms and that there's this, like, half a moon. I assume it's always just big cartoony, like, crescent moon now that exists because, they just...
With the nibble out of it like a wheel of cheese.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Oh, well. I know what you're fishing for. You're just fishing for more credit for Mazdamundi and Croak.
He did. It was pretty great, though.
Yeah.
Am I right?
All right. Okay, gents. We're gonna wrap it up there, and listeners, we're gonna leave you with the monstrous cliffhanger, I guess, of what did Teclis do, and was he successful or not as he lies on the floor of the Temple of Ulrich in Middenheim. So with that, we'll bid you farewell for tonight, and tune in again, and we'll continue with more of the end times with Archaon.